So prior to WPF, I don't have any Windows.NET programming experience. So one of the most challenging aspects of learning WPF has been that code behind C# layer. So one of the most confusing parts to me up until recently was how can I have a collection of items in the C#, so this could be an array or a list, and how can I bind that in the XAML? How can I bind to that list in the XAML? So say I wanted to populate a list box from a collection in the code behind. So the few different ways that you can accomplish that. So I've created a blank WPF application here, and I've sized it to 800 high by 300 wide. And what I'm going to do first is just come into my default grid, and I'm going to throw down a list box. I'm not going to do anything with it yet at this point, but I just want to create the general structure of the application. So what we're going to be doing is getting a list of all the running processes on your machine, and I want to display that in the list box. Okay, so I'm going to go to the code behind file now. And what we're going to do is we're going to use just a list, a generic list of items. So the list will allow us to store any type of object essentially into a collection that we can bind to in the XAML. Okay, so what I want to do is create a new class for that extends the list class. So creating that new class, I can then create an instance of that class in the XAML and be able to bind to the data. So I'm going to come in here under my main window class here and create the new class. So I'm going to say public class, and I'm going to call it processes. Now again, this is going to extend the list class. And here in the brackets here, I need to tell it which type of objects this list is going to hold. So in this situation, I want to hold a list of string values that represent the process names. So I'm going to say string. Okay, so now I can write my constructor function for this class. So that's going to be public processes. And I'm not going to be sending any values to the constructor. Okay, so the first thing I need to do once this class is instantiated is to get that list of all the running processes on my machine. So to do that, we're going to use the process class, which lives in the system.diagnostics namespace. So I'm going to say system.diagnostics.process. Now this variable that I'm creating here is going to need to be an array of all the running processes. And I'm going to call this plist for process list is equal to system.diagnostics.process, and then I'm going to use the static method getProcesses. So this static method returns an array of process objects here. So now what I want to do is I want to iterate through this plist array, and I want to add the process names to this list here. So I'm going to use the for each iterator. So for each system.diagnostics.process, and I'm going to call it p in plist. Okay, so as I iterate through this list, what I want to now do is add the process name to my list here. So I'm just going to say this.add. Now remember, I'm saying this because our list is actually this class itself, because we're extending the list class. And now I need to give it the string for the process name. So to do that, I'm going to say p, and then we want to use the process name property here. Now you can see there's all types of information that we have about the running processes on the machine. So if we wanted to create, a real rich process viewer, there's all the information that we would need here to do that. But I'm just using the name for right now, so I'm going to say p.processName. Okay, so that's all I need to do. So now this class that I've created, I can now create an instance of this class from the XAML, And then when I do that, I'm going to be able to bind to this data. So let's go back over to the XAML. Okay, so the first step we need to take here is we need to add a new XML namespace for our process viewer namespace. So we can't automatically reference things from this namespace unless we create an XML namespace here. So I'm going to come under here. I'm going to say XML namespace. And I'm just going to call it src for source. And then what we need to put is CLR dash namespace, and then colon, and then the namespace that we want to use. So we want to use the process viewer namespace. So I'm just going to copy this here and paste this in. So now in my XAML, if I want to refer to this namespace, I just need to use src before any values. Okay, so there's a couple of ways that we can get at the data. So the simplest and the one that makes the most sense to me is to create a new resource for the window. So I'm going to say window.resources. Okay, so now I want to create an instance of my processes class that we just created. So all I have to do that is open the bracket and then give src, which gets us into that process viewer namespace, colon, and then the name of the class. So it's called processes. So right there, I'm creating an instance of that processes class. Now I need to be able to reference it, so I need to give it a key. So X key, and I'm just going to call it P. So now that I've closed that, that's all I need to do to create an instance of the processes class. So now down here in the list box, all I need to do is set the item source. So this is the source for the items in the list box. And I need to set it to static resource P. So we're not using data binding here, so this is going to be a one-time thing where I'm just getting the values from this class, but that's okay for this example. So I'm going to hit F5, test it, see if we have any errors. It's looking good. And we can see here's our list box, and it's being populated with all the different processes that I have on my machine. And that's a lot of processes. Google Toolbar, I never installed that, which is kind of disturbing. So again, a very simple implementation, but it just gives you a good idea of how you can create CLR objects and collections in the code behind, and then create an instance of them here in the XAML and be able to bind to them.